Good morning. $1 billion. I have to actually update that bio they gave me. That is the peak value of all the companies that I've founded or co-founded. In the last 35 years, I've launched 10 different startups, 5 different industries. 2 of those we sold to venture capital, 1 to private equity. A couple of those companies failed. And today, I have 3 operating companies. I'm also a pilot. I'm a dive master. I've traveled the world. I've walked the Great Wall of China, ran with the bulls in Spain. I had dinner in Winston Churchill's private home outside of London. But my story is not about success. My story is about overcoming pain, failure, and child abuse. And I have 4 messages for you today. So let's get rolling. My story starts in kindergarten. And I had a babysitter. He lived next door to us. And my parents both worked. And so he would come and pick me up after school. And he would take me back to his house. And I would stay there till my parents got home. And he would tell me things like, if you tell your parents what I'm doing to you, you will be in big trouble. Because that's what sexual predators do. They blame the victim. I can tell you that up until about the age of 12, I lived in fear every day of my life. Because I knew that if my mother left the house, my stepfather was going to come looking for me. And he liked to hit. And he would tell me that if I told my mother what he was doing, it would be 10 times worse. I don't have time to get in all these, but I'll give you a couple more. I'm 16 years old and I'm standing in the front yard and I'm getting yelled at. Pretty typical. But this particular day I snapped and I started yelling back and I told him that I hated him. I hated everything about him and I would never be like him. And bam, down I went. And these words have been burned in my brain since that day. You are nothing more than a stupid effing 16-year-old. And you will never amount to anything. And you better not get up because I will take you out. I laid there and cried. I stopped going to school that year. I think I missed 32 days that semester. I was late another 12. We didn't have computers in school back then, so it took the school a while to figure it out. But when they did, I got called to the principal's office. And they told me I was expelled. I had failed out of high school. Now, I did manage to get back in, and I did manage to graduate with a whopping 1.2 GPA. And I remember as graduation was approaching, my stepfather came in my room one night, and he told me, "This is my house, and you are not welcome here. When you graduate, you need to leave." I was 17 years old. Where was I going to go? And I was angry, and I hated everything, and I hated everyone, and I hated him, and I hated my life. And I had massive authority problems. And I did not like being told what to do. So naturally, I joined the military. Because that seemed like a good idea. It was National Guard, so I was about a year on active duty, and I got home, and I'm now 19 years old, and I got to start my life. I got to get a job. And so over the next 2 years, with all my issues, I kept getting fired. I got fired working in a warehouse. I got fired working on a construction job as a laborer. Pick this up, bring it over here. I got fired making pizzas. Anybody ever waited tables? I got my first job as a waiter, and I was excited. And I remember I worked my first double shift on a Sunday, 12 hours long, and at the end of the day, you know, you do your checkout, and I'm adding up all the tickets and see how much money I made. At the end of my 12-hour shift, I owed the restaurant $6. And I remember the owner came over to me and he said, "Brian, you might want a different career path. Waiting tables is just above your pay grade." So I got a job as a busboy. I was 21 years old. I'm a busboy. My girlfriend is a waitress. And we decided to get married because that seemed like a good idea. So we quit our jobs. We moved up to Ohio and we got married. And I'm now 22 years old. And by the way, we didn't have jobs anymore. I didn't own a car. Didn't have a place to live. So I took my new wife and I moved in with my grandmother because she had an empty bedroom. And I took a job making $4 an hour mowing grass. Not because I liked mowing grass, I just didn't have any job skills and I had no education, and that was the only thing I was qualified for. I was a 22-year-old, newly married, living with my grandmother, day labor, when I was the age of a lot of the students in this university. Now, I did have a revelation, by the way, when I was mowing grass, because as it turns out, it didn't really require any skills. All we did was walk up and down the yard each day, making stripes, right? And so I had this idea that I would start my own business, and I got excited. I could build a company, I could be rich and successful. And I remember I went and I had lunch with my mother and I told her of my grand plan of business and money and success. And my mother told me that day, and again, things that are burned in your brain, right? She said, Brian, you need to lower your expectations in life. You are not going to be rich and successful. Starting a business is a bad idea. You need to get a job. I was so angry at her that day because all I heard in my head was, you're a loser and you'll never amount to anything. I didn't talk to her for over a year after that because she didn't believe in me, so what's the point? I did start that business, however. And over the next 8 years, my wife and I struggled, and we started to do good. And we did good right up until we didn't. And when I was 30 years old, I made a bunch of mistakes. I had no idea what I was doing, and that business collapsed and failed. And when it failed, I lost everything. I lost the house that I had bought. They came and repossessed my cars in the middle of the night. You ever get that knock on the door? I have. Turned my electricity off before Christmas. I got a letter from my bank saying, you've bounced 130 checks at our institution. We have closed your account. You are no longer welcome. Do not come back. So I was 30 years old. Oh, by the way, let's not forget my daughter. We found out at the same time she had atrial septal defect, hole in her heart. She needed open heart surgery. Oh, and by the way, she was also going blind in one eye. Can't make this stuff up. I'm 30 years old and I'm angry and I hate everybody and I hate everything and I hate my life. But it's in these times when you need to step back and do a little self-reflection, and you have to ask yourself some questions. What are you going to do now? Where are you going to go? And who are you as a person? You see, people tend not to talk about their past if it's abuse or if it's trauma. I know I didn't. People don't talk because they're ashamed or they're afraid of being judged. I'd been married for 8 years and my wife didn't know anything about my childhood. I didn't want anybody to feel sorry for me. I needed to feel strong and confident while inside my head I was a mess. And so I hid my pain in anger. And I used that anger to try and dominate people. Because in my head, I didn't want your pity, I wanted you to fear me. Because domination and fear are the opposite of weakness. Remember that stepfather standing over me and me lying in the yard crying. That's domination and fear, and that's weakness, and that's not what I wanted. But here's the thing. There is nothing that happened to you as a child, nothing that is your fault. But as an adult, and we are all adults here, if you allow those things to control the rest of your life, then that is your fault. If you intend to move on, you need to start taking responsibility for the things that you are not responsible for. And in my case, that was my childhood. Here's the deal. If you recognize any of these struggles in your life, if you've had any past trauma or abuse, you need to talk to somebody. A friend, a confidant, more than likely a counselor. And you need to get those issues out in the open so that they can stop affecting your life today and in the future. In my case, it was years before I ended up going to counseling, and then primarily because I ended up in a divorce. My childhood killed my marriage. I also found out at this same time that the person I grew up with that I thought was my father wasn't actually my father. I am the child of an affair. The real father knew, the fake father knew, the abusive stepfather knew, but they lied to me my whole life. I only met my father a couple years ago. I also found out in counseling that I have ADHD. Pretty good case of it. And that explains a lot. Explains why I had trouble reading books, explains why I get distracted easily, explains why I need constant input. But I will tell you this, that properly harnessed, ADHD can be a superpower. It does allow me in business to do things that most people can't do. And if you struggle with ADHD and you don't know how to use it, you need to find somebody who understands it and can teach you how to turn it into a superpower in your life. Back to the story. I'm 30 years old. I'm a complete failure. Everything's fallen apart in my life and I am angry. But this is the greatest secret of success. And if you talk to people who have succeeded at high levels, they will all tell you probably the same thing. The greatest secret of success is just to take another step forward. When everything's fallen apart, when it feels like you can't go on, you just take another step forward. And that's what I did. I shut down that landscaping company and I started selling insurance. I started a little insurance agency, and 3 years from the date I had complete failure, 3 years later, I sold that insurance agency to a venture capital group for $1 million. Broke to millionaire in 3 years. I then started another business, same insurance company online, sold it to another venture capital group. Started another company, sold it to a private equity group. That was an $80 million acquisition. I made it. I'm now rich and successful, right? Everything they told me I couldn't do in life. After that, I went on and wrote 4 books. 2 of those are Wall Street Journal bestsellers. I failed English, by the way. After that, today, I started a chain of restaurants, which I own in Atlanta. I also have an executive coaching business, and I own a real estate company in Georgia and Florida. But see, again, the story is not about success. The story is about overcoming. And I could have given up when I was a busboy. I could have given up when I was mowing grass. But something inside me was pushing me to do something more with my life. Something was pushing me. I needed to do more than what I was. And I have found that people that go through childhood trauma and abuse tend to go down one of 3 paths. The first path is that the abused child becomes the abuser as an adult. We call this continuing the cycle. The second path, these people never learn to deal with their trauma. They never find the help they need, and they spend the rest of their life doing nothing. The third group, you find a lot of CEOs and high-performing people fall into this group. The third people take that trauma and channel it into fuel, and they use that fuel to break the cycle of their family history. They use that fuel to push themselves in an entirely new direction. They become what we know is a change agent in their family. Now, if you've had past trauma and abuse, and if you're not happy with the cycle you're in, you can make a decision to be the change agent in your family. You can take your life in an entirely new direction if you get the help, figure out how to do it, and you choose to. You see, all I knew back in those days, and I didn't know any of what I'm telling you right now, all I knew was that I had something to prove. I had something to prove to the kids that laughed at me in school. I had something to prove to the teachers that failed me. I had something to prove to the jobs that fired me and the people that repossessed my cars. I had something to prove to every single person in my past. But the funny thing about going through counseling or therapy is that after 3 years, you come to a realization. And in my case, I came to the realization that I did not need to prove anything to any of those people. Those people hadn't thought about me in years and didn't care about me one way or another. When I looked in the mirror, I realized that there was only one person who still thought I was that kid laying in the grass. There's only one person that didn't believe in me, and that was me. And I needed to start taking responsibility for the things in my life that I wasn't responsible for. You see, my story is not about success. My story is about learning to overcome those demons that were living in my head and coming out the other side. If you think that you have had any of these types of struggles in your life, I'm here to tell you that I've been there. I've lived it. I lived in that hell, and I am an example of what you can still do irregardless of what happened in your past. My fourth and final message today is this: whatever you think is holding you back, whatever you think is stopping you from achieving the goals that you've set for yourself, is probably not what's holding you back. It may slow you down while you learn to deal with it, but if you will make the decision that you are going to deal with those demons and you will find somebody to help you, your entire future is ahead of you, not behind you. And my message today is simple. If you so choose, your past is not your future. Thank you.